Hello developers, and welcome back to Elixir Pro. In this video, we're going to take a look on Phoenix hooks. My idea is to first present a general idea on how you can trigger a Phoenix hook, how this feature enables JavaScript interoperability. After we have this general idea, we're going to start using the box.com so that we can trigger a hook to preview a file that was updated on their website. I hope you enjoy, and let's get started after the intro. So let's get started. Mix pjx-new pjx hooks. Instead of PR, this should be USA. --live -no active because we're not going to be using the database. Let's fetch our dependencies. Let's head into our application. Git init, git add --o, git commit sign message, initial commit. That's pretty much what we need to start our application. So let's start it with pjx.server. Let's check that we have a running application. Yes, we have it. So the first thing that we'll be doing is actually clean up the root.html, take this header off, and then let's remove the container here. It's the same thing here. On the page live, let's remove everything except for the mount, but on the mount we're just going to return OK socket. And on the page live, let's just return hello world. Okay, so we have like a cleaned up Phoenix application. Let's start taking a look on the Phoenix hooks. So let's do the default thing. So let's create a counter. Value of at counter. This thing we have the value of counter is. Let's wrap this thing in a h1 tag. Okay, let's put the socket, receive socket, sign. Actually assign counter 0. If you check our application now, we have a counter 0. Let's go back to the page live and create a button. So button. Which will have a pjx-click event of name ink, and the button have ink text. Once we click here, we want to update this thing to +1. If we check application, we did not handle the ink event. So let's handle this thing in our page live. Handle event ink socket, receive socket, sign, counter, socket dot assign sign dot counter +1. If you go back here, assign. So I spelled this correctly. So now if you click on the +1, 2, and 3, and 4, we have like an HTML tag that wraps a socket assigns, and whenever this thing updates, we're going to trigger off our Phoenix hook. Well, to do that, we are going to go back here to page live. We're going to put a phx-hook, which has a name of hook name. And this directive, for you to use this directive, it's also necessary that you put an ID directive here. So let's put like this is the counter ID something, just so that it does not complain that we are not assigning an ID. And if we check here on the developer tools, It says that the hook name is not defined. It's unknown hook. So let's define our hook in app.js. Here, let's create a const hook. Hooks, actually, which is going to be an empty object. Here on the live socket, let's put another key here called hook equal hooks. I don't know anymore if it is hooks or just hooks, but I think it's hooks this way. And let's put it like this, maybe. No, it's hook, I guess, just that. Okay, so let's create a on the hook. On the hooks. Hooks dot name, which we call that. What do we call that? It's called hook name. This is going to be an object. Inside this object, we're going to have the mounted function, which is also an empty object, and the updated, which is also an empty object. And by default, let's put a console.log saying this was triggered when the live view was mounted, and this thing when the counter was updated. So actually I think this should be hooks probably. And there we go, so it's hooks. If we check our hook name, this should have triggered the mounted, if I spell mounted correctly. Oops, mounted. And now we can see that the trigger for mounted was triggered, and once we click here, we receive that this was triggered when the counter updated. So whenever we click here, we have like many messages for triggering the updated callback. Okay, so now we have a general idea on how to trigger these events. Next thing that I want to do is actually set up a box so we can use. So I'm going to use some of these preview components. The component that I want to use is this one that enables me to preview a file. To do that, we need to go for the installation and grab the CDN. So let's grab here the CDN. Actually, it's this one here. Let's go back to our root.html. Let's put our script here. Actually, let me indent this a little bit better. Let's grab the CSS and the JS. So this is the CSS. Let's grab it here. And then let's grab the JS. Okay. Need to restart the application if we're not mistaken. And now to use that component, we need to go back here to the preview. We need to grab the JS that it enables us to create this component. Let's put it on the app.js. Let's put here on the mounted. But as you can see, we need to pass a config data.fileid and a config data.access token. For it to grab this access token, if you want to produce the tutorial, the content of this tutorial, you need to go to the Box developer website and register for a developer account. It's free and it will enable. It's fairly easy to set up the access token. So what I want to show you now is how we can pass a push event from the backend to the hook on the app.js. So what we are going to be doing here is now calling this.handle event. We need to pass here the name of our event, so name of our event is going to receive a payload, and we can then execute an arrow function here inside that, where the only thing that I'm going to do right now is console.log the payload. Okay. For us to be able to actually fetch the content of this payload on page live, once our socket is mounted, we are going to actually push, so phoenix.liveview.push event, the name of our event, that is name of our event, I believe. Let's get like this thing to be sure that it matches. So here, and then we're gonna send a payload, which can be like some key, some value. Okay. So if we go back to our application now and refresh it, we can see that the page, I think I misspelled payload. Payload. That's fine. And you see that we receive here some key with some value. So actually now I'm going to set up from the config file with our access token. You can do the same thing here, and we can go back once everything is set up. Okay, so we're back. I'm gonna grab my access token using the application.getEnv, and I'm gonna call it box. Actually, this is pjx underscore hooks underscore USA, getting the access token. And we want to pass here to in our payload the access token, which has the value of access token. What I also want to do here is grab the file ID, which we need. So this is the file ID of the file that I want to preview. So let me put it here. Let's pass it in our payload. So file ID. Now in our app.js, we can then actually put this thing up here, get all the content inside here and put inside here. This should be payload.file underscore ID. This should be payload.access token. We can then, and if everything is right, we should see our previewed file on our application. And I think I misspelled my key, so let me check that. Okay, now we have no errors. To display actually our content, we need to go back to the preview and let's grab the HTML. So let's grab this thing here. Let's go back into our page live.html.lex. Let's put it down below, and I'm gonna put a style of height 800 pixels and width of 100%. Let's go back to our application now, and there we go. We have our file previewed. We could also actually put the same thing in app.js, but instead of putting on the mounted, we could have put this thing on the updated. So let me grab this thing here and put it here. And if we go back right now, we don't see our file, but if I click here on the ink, oh yeah, it did not trigger because our our event does not push that event. So let's go back to the page live, and actually let's push the same event here. And let's pass once again the access token and the file ID here. You could refactor later so that we don't have like this duplication of code. But if I click here on the ink, we see our file popping up in our application. Well, I think that was it for this episode. Let's just review everything that we learned. So to create a Phoenix hook, we need to attach this directive called pjx hook with a hook name, and it's mandatory that we pass an ID as well. Once you created this hook, you can go to app.js, define this hooks object, and inside there we can create the hook name, which should match the name of the hook you put on that HTML tag. After the hook is created, you need to pass the hooks into this live socket. This is the name. This should match the object that you created for those hooks. After that, we go to page live and we set up this push event so we can actually fetch some data on that app.js. To handle the name of our event, we should put this.handle event in the updated or in the mounted. Remember that you need to pass this this push event on the socket on the backend, and then you can trigger any other information, any other JavaScript function doing this process. Well, that was it for this episode. Thanks for watching. Until next time, bye.